Dear all, good morning. Thank you for joining us in this webinar. We'll start now, and just as people get in, I will keep on talking, and then what we can do is leave the questions until the end. You can write any questions you have on the go in the chat that we have for the webinar, and I will be answering them in the end. So my name is Andrea Martin. I am the director for Sfera's Corporate Governance and Compliance Department and in charge of doing the registries for the Transparency and Final Beneficiaries Registry. So we're gonna explain how this legislation has evolved and the reason behind it. So you'll see this has been called also the Shareholders Registry or the Final Beneficiaries Registry. It is present in various countries. It's not only a Costa Rican law. What we have encountered in this process is that every country has managed it quite differently. So I think it's important for people who are not Costa Rican and are not familiarized with local law to know how it's being executed here, because we have certain clients who have businesses all around the world, and it's been a little hard to explain why maybe it's different of how it works elsewhere. So hopefully with this webinar, you'll understand a little more in depth of the information we will be requesting from you as clients in order to file on your behalf. So the applicable regulations in an order of importance, let's say, is law number 9416, which is basically the law to diminish fiscal fraud. In this law, it was foreseen that through bylaws, it had to be regulated how we were going to set up a final beneficiaries registry. And one of the questions we get asked a lot is this a tax law? So it comes from a tax law and it does have a tax perspective, but it's not the only reason why it was enacted. This is just one of the points that was developed in this new law that came to reform the whole Costa Rican tax law system. After the law was enacted, we received the regulations for the final beneficiaries and transparency registry bylaws, which have a more general scope of everything we need to do, but it wasn't specified. So that's when the joint resolution comes in, and this is done with our tax authorities and with our drug enforcement agency, which is called ISLA. We are still missing 3 additional joint resolutions, which will be for NGOs and associations, for administrators of third-party funds, and for trust funds. We'll speak about this a little more in depth in regards to trust funds, because as you may know, many of your corporations currently in Costa Rica are actually owned by a trust fund. So we are already registering and reporting trust funds. So we still don't know what they're gonna develop in this sort of fourth. But this is actually the second joint resolution, because this one's supposed to be enacted in January. But I can tell you that we're already filing for trust funds, and I'll let you know how we're doing this. What is the objective of the law? So these, maybe we'll start, even if my area of expertise is not tax. We have a tax director that deals with all these issues. The law does have a tax perspective, as I said initially. So let's talk about capital gains. And the most recurring question we get asked, especially by our clients from the US and from Canada, is regarding how is this going to affect their tax situation back home. So I can start by saying that this new regulation is not a double taxation agreement with another country, and it's not a tax information exchange agreement treaty. So when you say tax information exchange agreement treaty is, for example, FATCA, CRS, which is done with banks. And then a double taxation agreement is when 2 countries decide that they're not going to collect both of them the tax, and then one of the countries says, okay, you can get the whole taxation for that person, and then it's reciprocal, so you get it in both countries. This is neither one of them. This is important because as of now, this is a local requirement. This has nothing to do with, for example, IRS in the States or with other tax authorities, but we can't sort of close ourselves off and think it might not lead up to that. So in that sense, it can become, since this information is in a database, eventually we can have tax authorities ask Costa Rica to share this information. As of now, that's not the point of the law, and it's not foreseen. So if we look at it from the perspective of today, that's not a problem. We can't really foresee how it's going to be handled in the future. In regards to capital gains, so the problem we've had, or the issue we've had here in Costa Rica, is that until the tax reform that came into effect in July 1st, if you had an inactive corporation or a corporation that was a holding, you didn't have to keep your accounting books for that company. It wasn't requested by law. As of July 1st, you have to. So what has been the problem that certain clients have been facing? You have to start your books, let's say from starting July 1st, when you have a property, when you have a car. So in effect, let's say the biggest issue we foresee in the future with this law is the tax authorities, if you get summoned for a revision of your documents and you can't explain how, for example, one of your corporations has a car, how it has various pieces of real estate, it may become a problem. So the biggest recommendation we're giving on this matter is, to get in touch with your accountant and with a tax specialist. If you have a lot of land, if you have a lot of holding companies that have, for example, bank accounts and you never reported that, it's not a problem in the sense that you weren't obliged to do so before, but you have to now. So it is something that tax authorities, when everyone has filed, when they get enough people who can review the information we're filing, because now you just file. You don't have someone at the other end of the screen looking at the documents you're uploading and seeing if that's sufficient. So eventually, when they do, the idea is that in these years following July 1st, 2019, you're getting everything in order as to not have an unjustified capital gains. So basically, that's the fiscal risk of this law. It's not something present. It's something you do have to keep in mind, because you're not filing, for example, the natural person per se. You're filing, so this is a Costa Rican corporation. It can be an LLC or a corp, an SA or an SRL, and you're saying who's up in the chain of ownership. So in the end, you say the final beneficiary is in effect a natural person. So that, tax authorities should be diligent enough to review what that corporation has in assets. If we look at the reality of our tax authorities and everything they have to do and the budget problems they're facing, this is not something that's going to happen in the short term. But it may. So how should it be documented? As I said, starting July 1st, everyone should start, getting their accounting business in order, and hopefully be able to have the assistance of an accountant to get this in order. So this report, which are the exemptions or who are exempt from declaring information. So when you have a company whose shares are listed, so public companies, this can be in an organized stock market, either national or international, you don't have to file. So how does it work in reality? You're filing for your Costa Rican corp, and then let's say above in the chain, you have 2-3 tiers, and eventually you have a company who's listed. The tiers before that company that's public, you do have to report them. There's a special, let's say, link to report the chain itself. But the moment you reach the public company, you have the option to tell the system. Let's remember, this is, sorry, I didn't specify before. What we're doing is we're uploading it, and for the people that just came into into the webinar, we're uploading this into the central bank's online platform. So the whole process is actually online. It's not physically going to the central bank. Everything's done online. So when you reach the point that you have a public company, you basically tell the system, I have an exemption to declare the information, which, I mean, it's obvious why. You know, public listed companies, they're let's say owners change on a daily basis. It's almost impossible to report. The thing is, you have to upload a document to prove this. So the whole chain of ownership and everything we're filing in the most basic level, you don't have to upload any information. The reason why we have to request our clients certain documents to be apostilled or certain documents to be sent in original form is more sort of as a backup that the information we're filing is true, accurate, and current. So this is one of the only times when, and you'll see there's another one where you actually have to upload a document to the system. We have a couple of clients who are listed, and what the problem we have been encountering is that it's very difficult, for example, to ask NASDAQ to give you a document that says you're listed. It seems that it should be quite easy, but it isn't. So you can ask for someone in the board of the company to produce this document, which then has to be apostilled for it to be legal in Costa Rica. So if, I mean, this has a little more background. I mean, there's not that many companies whose final beneficiary is a company that's listed. So if you want extra information on this point, please feel free to contact me afterwards and I can let you know, because there's a lot of information that we need that this document must contain, and it's not something basic that the stock market has ready to produce. So it's something that you have to ask for specifically. Then we have all the financial entities that are supervised by one of our regulators. So you have, banks. So that's SUGEF, SUGEVAL, SUPEN for the pension funds. And then basically all managers of third-party resources that are already regulated by SUGEVAL. As I said in one of the first parts of the presentation, we still have 3 joint resolutions that need to be enacted by the government, and one of them is the people who manage third-party resources. I see some of the people in the webinar are clients of ours who I'm helping with the final Beneficiaries Registry, and whom I know have also had to file for SUGEF, for example, brokers. So the point behind this is, if you're already being regulated by SUGEF, which is our financial entities regulator, we find it unnecessary for these companies to have to file again. But for now, while this other joint resolution isn't enacted, we have to keep fighting for the whatever SAs or SRLs that exist basically in the country. Afterwards, the executive power, our legislative power, judicial, the Supreme Tribunal for Elections, and all autonomous entities, they don't have to file. And then the public trusts that we have don't have to file either. Okay, we get asked a lot that the name of the regulation is a little confusing. So why, they tell us, if it's a final beneficiaries legislation, why do I have to register and report the whole chain of ownership? And I mean, it's a good question. And what people need to understand is that, in effect, what the system, what the tax authorities want is not to know who the final beneficiary is, and that's enough, because then it would basically be that you can upload a sworn statement and say the final beneficiary of my LLC is Andrea Martin. They want the whole chain of ownership. So this is important, and that's why sometimes we have to ask for ask our clients for a lot of information of that structure. So let's say if the corporation is owned by a LLC in Delaware, we need the information of that LLC in Delaware, even if it's not, managed by Costa Rican law. And that way, until you reach the final beneficiary, which has to be a natural person. What is another, let's say, issue that we've encountered with the platform? Part of this webinar is that or understand that what's in the law is not necessarily what we've been encountering in the online platform. And there's been, several issues when reporting. And one of them is the 15% for substantive participations. So the law, the bylaws, and the joint resolution always talk about the fact that you don't have to file whatever is below the 15% threshold. The problem is the platform does not understand this. So the moment, let's say, your capital stock is divided between several shareholders, and you have a shareholder that owns, let's say, 10%, in theory you only have to file for 90%. The problem is when it doesn't close in 100, the platform doesn't let you move on. So that is one of the main issues we're having. So far, the corporations with which we have had this problem, clients have told us it doesn't really matter, just file 100%, even if the law tells you you don't have to if it's less than 15. The central bank knows this is a problem. Our tax authorities know this is a problem, and they haven't fixed it yet. Other clients have told us, hold off until this is solved, and see if, further into the year, this is solved internally through, let's say, more technologically, because the law is quite clear. But it is an issue that we're having since the beginning. So this property structure can become a little hard for the platform to understand. So the platform was made in a very simple matter, which in the beginning only the president of an SA and a manager of an SRL could report. They've been changing who can report, how they can report, but the platform wasn't ready for this. So when you have, corporate structures that are a little more elaborate, that it's not, the owner of the LLC is immediately a natural person, or you might have one foreign company and then you have the natural people who own it, the system is not that user friendly. So we've had the situation that for very simple corporations, it'll take you around 45 minutes to an hour to report very simple corporation. Let's say if we have all the information at hand, usually, we have to ask clients to update their personal information. We might not have your current passports. As you may know, or you might not know, in Costa Rica, you're born and you're given an ID, and that's your ID number for the rest of your life. In most countries, in Europe, in the US, in Canada, you change your passport every 5 to 10 years. So we need to file your old passport with the one that you acquired the stock, and then your new passport. So all this information, it's until you're dealing with the system that you know what to request from each company. And then something that's really important is the joint and several liability and responsibility that you have for reporting. So what does this mean? Whomever is filing has the immediate responsibility for the information they are uploading into the system. So since we're foreigners, Sfera is doing this on your behalf. That's why it's so important that we have your updated personal information, because eventually, if there's an omission of information, if we file information that's not completely accurate, who's going to be responsible is the person that's actually filing. Something that's very important to keep in mind, and you'll see if we've already reported on your behalf or are reporting on your behalf, that we've told you to be very careful when your partners own other Costa Rican corporations. And let me explain why. If you have a Costa Rican corporation and you file for that corporation and you say, okay, my owners are, let's say 2 natural people and another Costa Rican corporation, but that's just one of your partners. You don't have control over that company. If that company doesn't file, upwards to their final beneficiary, you are considered to be non-compliant. So that's why, for those of you whom we've talked about and we're starting to finalize this reporting process, we've told you, you have to contact your partner and you have to tell them you have to file. And why this is important if you don't have control of the company is that you as a board member are going to be held liable, because in reality your report is incomplete. So let's say Sfera files on your behalf and we say, okay, these are the people that own the first tier, but whomever is the president or the manager of that other company that owns your company, we don't have control over that. And I can't file if I don't have the proper, powers of attorney to file. So that's why it's very important, if you already foresee that you have, let's say, complicated corporate structures above your personal entity, that you start getting in touch with your partners, especially if they're people who own also other Costa Rican entities. Because if the corporate structure all the way up are foreign companies, that's the responsibility of the person who's initially filing. So let's say if I'm filing for your corporation and I have to go all the way to final beneficiary, I'm going to go through all your tiers. The problem is when you meet another Costa Rican entity that you don't control in one of those tiers. So that's important to keep that in mind. This is a very important topic, the deadlines for uploading the report. This has generated a lot of confusion and a lot of stress with clients. I mean, with the general population in general, not only foreign clients, also Costa Rican ones, because the little publicity this regulation got was a chart saying who could file, which eventually changed, and we'll talk about that now, and the dates in which you had to file. So, as an effort, I don't know if some of you remember, but in Sfera, we started sending you newsletters since January, because the report was supposed to start in the beginning of the year, and they had to, sort of push the deadline all the way up to September, and that's why we started filing in September. But it generated confusion because the few, the scarce information that was, present in local newspapers and on the news was that it was done by groups. So according to the last number of your corporate ID, that's when you had to file. So you started 01 was September, 2-3 October, and so on. So you finalized January 2020 with those corporations that ended in 8 and 9. Since the first resolution, one of the last parts of the joint resolution already stated that you would be considered non-compliant if by February 1st, 2020 you hadn't filed. So this, I mean, it generated a lot of confusion because, the government was, generating publicity that said, it's by groups, but then the law itself said you had time until February. The tax authorities were requested to sort of come to have a stance on this matter, and they did say that we have time to file until February 1st. So the reality is that regardless of the last number of your corporate ID, we have time to file until January 31st, 2020. And then starting February 1st is when you'll get the fines, when you'll be put in the list of non-compliance and other problems that will be generated to your company if you don't file. So, I mean, this is important that everyone knows because, and it's understandable. People are very stressed because if they had their corporation ending in 0 and 1 and they hadn't filed, they were worried. So just so that it's clear for everyone, we have time to file until January 31st, 2020. we do not recommend wait until the last minute. One of the biggest complaints for those of us who are filing on a daily basis is the platform is not user friendly. The platform, as it usually happens in Costa Rica when they start a new system that's managed by the government, it usually freezes. If it's a point in the day where a lot of people are using it, it usually doesn't work. As some of you have had probably the experience with our tax authorities, Ministerio de Hacienda, when you have to file your taxes. People usually wait um, to the last 2-3 days when you can file, and the system is completely collapsed. So we recommend not waiting, and at least starting to get all your documents in order in these months, because if it's a complicated corporate structure, we need the documents brought from the US. In many cases, the basic structure, reporting your LLC or reporting your trust, we don't need the original documents, but in certain cases we might need it. So the sooner you get in touch with us and we start getting your documents ready, the better it is, so that we're not rushed in January. There are two types of reports. You have your ordinary and your extraordinary reports. This first one is an ordinary one, which goes from September to January. And then every April is the mandatory ordinary report. So that's why when we've been in contact with some of you, we've told you this is an annual requirement. It's not the first and last time you're going to have to do this. It's something that's recurrent. And then you have your extraordinary reports that are mandatory every time you have a modification in your structure, in your ownership structure, higher than the 15% threshold that they established in the law. So if you sell 16% of your stock, you have to file. And this is being highly criticized because, in theory, there should only be extraordinary reports. If your company hasn't been modified, then why file every April? But that's the way the law is enacted, that they haven't said that's going to shift. They're not going to shift their stance on this. So, the reality is we're actually worried of what's going to happen every April, because you have, literally thousands of corporations being filed in 1 month. For this first ordinary, let's say, session of reporting, you've had from September till January, and it's a lot of work. So we don't foresee how they're expecting all Costa Rican corporations, active or inactive, before Hacienda, to report in 1 month. But that's the way it's established as of now. So new companies have 20 business days to file who their final beneficiaries are, regardless of the time of the year that they're established and registered. And then you get into the regular system. Every April you have to file. Every time you modify your capital structure upwards of 15%, you have to file. Okay. And then the extraordinary report, which is the one I told you, that it's if you have a modification higher than 15%, in this case you have 15 business days to file. So if we as a law firm have your books and we are in complete control of your transactions, this is something we're going to do automatically. We know we have to file on your behalf. I highly recommend, if be it a Sfera or another law firm you work with, it doesn't have your books and you tend to use different firms for your legal matters, that you're aware that whenever you have one of these situations, you have to tell your lawyer to file on your behalf. So it's something that you have to keep in mind in order not to be non-compliant. So what are the main points of or important aspects to take home, and why we sometimes are nagging on information you have to give us if we're filing on your behalf, is because the filing is not a simple filing where you just say, the owner of this LLC is Andrea Martin, period. It has a lot of information that you have to put in, and it has the legal effects of a sworn statement. So that's why we require, updated information on your behalf in order for us not to be eventually liable for information that's not true or accurate. Another, this is going back to the part where I told you who's exempt from filing. If you have an international, corporate entity which has a complete impossibility of being able to report the final beneficiaries, you are exempt. But this is very important. In order for you to, to tell the platform, the central bank's platform, that you can't file, I mean, it's impossible for me to tell you who the final beneficiaries are, you have to upload proof, the same as what we spoke about before with public entities. So, I mean, we haven't encountered a jurisdiction where it's impossible to file the final beneficiaries. This could happen when you have, I don't know, countries where there's not a shareholders registry per se, but it's, I mean, entities that usually have bad reputations, I mean, due to various tax scandals, it is possible to file on their behalf. So as of now, we haven't encountered this, but it's important that you know that if we reach a tier in your structure that is impossible, let's say, to report, you can not report, but you have to upload the information and, I mean, the proof. And that proof has to be signed by the country that says, by the legal entity or the government entity that's in charge, let's say, of corporations. So let's say it's Costa Rica, you would need, for example, the public registry to give you a document that says that it's impossible to know who your final beneficiaries are. So because this is something that Costa Rica is doing, one of the reasons to get into the OECD, a lot of countries are in the same process. So, I mean, it's going to be rather hard, or at least we haven't encountered this again, to have a jurisdiction that's going to be willing to, submit an official document that says that it's impossible to know who the final beneficiaries are. This is, we get asked about this a lot, and it's very important that you know who can access your confidential information that we're uploading to the central bank. So initially, I can say the central bank itself cannot access your information. The security system that was set up for this is, top of the line. It's something that's been done with international entities that have sort of helped the central bank to get this database running. Actually, just as a, let's say, a fun fact, countries who have a final beneficiaries registry, none of them have a database that's sort of the custodian is the central bank. This is my personal opinion. We believe that the reason why it's the central bank is to give people a little more confidence of who handles their information. I mean, out of most government entities in Costa Rica, the central bank is, it has an outstanding reputation, but it doesn't have a reason, let's say a legal reason of why it's the central bank. It's actually, let's say, odd that it's a central bank that's the custodian, not, for example, our tax authorities, our Treasury Department, the Ministerio de Hacienda. So they can't, their employees can't. It's only Ministerio de Hacienda and ICD, which is the Costa Rican Institute on Drugs, who can access your information. So how can they access my information? If in the case of, our Treasury Department, if they believe, that there is sufficient proof to know that you're avoiding taxes, they're going to be able to request the information from the central bank. And in the case of the Costa Rican Institute on Drugs, it will be more on the lines of an assumption of drug trafficking, financing terrorism, or sort of more on the drug side of the situation. So already ICD has has direct contact with banks. So if a bank believes there's an unjustified sort of income for that person, and there's high evidence that it might be linked to drugs or terrorism, ICD already has the capability to act and to request the information from banks. So it works the same with this final beneficiaries registry. The law, the bylaws and the joint resolution foresee high sanctions for public workers, and their duty of confidentiality is rather high. And as I said, not even the people who work for the central bank have access. So just to give you an example, whenever we've encountered problems with the system, the proper authority to contact is actually Ministerio de Hacienda. It's not even the central bank. So let's say since it began, the people who are in charge of the database functioning correctly is Ministerio de Hacienda. It's not even the central bank. So they're just in charge of the technological part of the database. So this is important. Which are the consequences of not reporting? Starting February 1st, you'll have a list of people who are not compliant. And this will have several effects. So for example, the National Public Registry and our National Bureau of Public Notaries, which is the corresponding entity that oversees our work as public notaries, you will be in a list in both of those. So in regards to the public registry, and for those of you who've lived long enough in Costa Rica, or who have active, let's say, corporate matters with the firm, you'll know that if you're, let's say, behind with paying your caja, which is Social Security, or your taxes, you can get a certificate of good standing out of the National Public Registry. This is going to be the same. So this is just, let's say, another aspect that has to be in order for you to get something as simple as a certificate of good standing from the public registry. And us as public notaries, we won't be able to certify anything regarding your corporation if, when we go online into the system, we realize you're not compliant. So it does have effects that are gonna, let's say, freeze your everyday movements for your corporation. And then something that's a little more harsh are the fines. The fines go from $2,500 all the way up to $78,000, which is, give or take, the equivalent of 1.5 million colones and 45 million colones. So these are quite high. What is how do you get fined in the lower end or the higher end? It depends if you're an active or inactive corporation, how much you file, and also how they analyze why you didn't file. So if you don't file your corporation and that corporation has, I don't know, tons of real estate, you have cars, you have bank accounts, and they assume you're not filing your corporation because you can't explain how you got those assets that are under your corporation, the fine might be much higher. So, I mean, it is quite open for the tax authorities in regards to the fines per se. Something important before we get into the questions, and since this is a webinar in English, we are assuming most of you or all of you are foreign, is the filing per se. So when this regulation started, the government only allowed for the presidents of SAs, so of corporations, and the managers of SRLs, which are the equivalent of an LLC, for example, to file. That was then broadened into whichever other member of the board. So for example, a secretary, a treasurer, vice president, if you have it, who already has powers of attorney and legal representation in the company, they can file. Also, if you have a registered power of attorney, you can file. What's the problem? The database was made to sort of pull from the public registry the information on the president and the manager and sub-manager, of each corporation. So the system doesn't understand if whomever is filing is a secretary, a treasurer, or someone with special powers of attorney. So in these cases, you require there's no way to elude this, that a public notary authorizes you first before the system. And what's another problem? If you're foreign and you don't have residence in Costa Rica, so you don't have your DMEX, you can't acquire a digital signature device. And that's one of the most important aspects of this law. If you don't have a digital signature device, you can't file. So that's why for most of you, that Sfera is filing on your behalf. The reason we're filing is because you can't. By law, you cannot acquire this digital signature, which is the first thing you need to pop into your computer in order to even access the central bank system, which is another of the security measures. It's not whimsical. It's not, only Costa Ricans can do it, but it's, acquiring a digital signature means you having, to have a meeting with your bank that is connected to the central bank, because the digital signature devices are actually procured by the central bank. So it's a security, let's say, mechanism for this. Which are the ways through which you can give us a special power of attorney so we can file on your behalf? I think this is important for those of you who haven't started the process to know. We have several ways of doing this if you don't have a digital signature device. If you are in Costa Rica, we're offering the possibility of appearing before one of our public notaries, and then you grant the special power of attorney in the name of your corporation to someone from the firm. It's usually going to be one of the partners in Sfera. Just as a side note, the reason why most lawyers / public notaries have a digital signature device is because it's mandatory by law when you're a public notary. So, all the partners in Sfera are public notaries. And then let's say more than half of the lawyers in the firm are also public notaries. So we have the digital signature. So that's why you're giving it to us. You can give it to anyone else who has a digital signature device. The reason why lawyers have sort of took on this matter is because when you're dealing with a system, there's certain things that are not that obvious. And then if it's foreign documents, there's certain things that don't have a translation into Spanish unless you understand sort of the legal details of the document you're reading. So that's why most lawyers are, let's say, offering this service to nationals and foreign people. And then the other option you have, if you don't live in Costa Rica, is doing it through a proxy letter. This was sort of a problem in the beginning when this was enacted, because our tax authorities delegated to our public notaries bureau if we could do it through proxy. And again, if we've been in contact since the beginning of the year, you'll know that it was impossible in the beginning. We're rather worried because the costs for our clients were gonna, go through the roof, because you would either have to go to a consulate or an embassy to grant the special power of attorney, or you would have to come to Costa Rica. And this was, it was unfair to ask our clients to do this, but at a point in time, this was the only option. Now, it's been cleared by them that we can do it via proxy letter. So the way it works is we send you a proxy letter to the owners of the company, so quota holders or shareholders, and you give us the special power of attorney as POA in order for us to file on your behalf. After which, so we hold the shareholders meeting or a members meeting. We have to notarize that. We have to upload that authorization into the system. After the system accepts this authorization of the SPOA, then the person you're authorizing, so one of the partners in Sfera, then we can file on your behalf. So it's on our end, it's a process that has several steps. On your end, you just have to sign the proxy, send it back signed and scanned, and then we take care of the rest. So that's the process we're following. This is it on my end on the most important information for the final beneficiaries registry. I'm going to read the questions you have been sharing with us and answer each one by one. So let's see. Okay, so the first question is, new corporations should have had this done with registration of incorporation. That's a very good question. And no, what the tax authorities are saying is that everything that's, new corporations that are done in these months or modifications you're doing in these months, you still have time to file until January. So it's only for this period of time from, February 1st on, every new corporation has the 20 days, and then any modification in your stock has the 15 business days. Let's say, does having a new passport number qualify as an extraordinary report requirement? No, ma'am, it doesn't. The only thing we do is that whenever an important thing to mention is we don't know how the system is going to look in April. However, I mean, as it is now, and because since it started, it's been modified at least every 2 weeks. We see something different, and for us it's very hard because sometimes we actually have to ask you for information when we've already requested it. So for example, the point that you have to put the person's passport when acquiring the stock and the person's new passport, that's new. That started about 3 weeks ago. So we don't know how it's going to look in April, but we won't have to file an extraordinary report when that happens. But when we reach April, we will have to say that I assume we're going to have to say your new passport is, blah. So, I mean, we can ask for that when the moment comes. But if you do, and this is just a general recommendation for everyone who's foreign, whenever you change passports, or let's say you get your residence in Costa Rica, it's important that you send us the information. That way we keep your KYC up to date, and then at the time when we're reporting, we already have all your information. Do you have an example of a document that may be accepted to prove that a company is publicly listed in a stock market? We're in the process of filing one right now, but I mean, I wouldn't be able to share this with another client because it's not confidential information because it's public, but I wouldn't be able to share specifically that one. What we're doing with clients who have in their, one of their tiers a public company is I tell you specifically what the document needs to contain. So that's how we're handling it, because as I said, I don't know, NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, they don't have a document ready to procure with this information. So it's sort of custom made. Okay, what are all the steps to obtain a digital signature device and what is the cost? This is a really good question. This is more of a general comment that I've gotten from our clients. As of now, since last month, there are no possible dates to acquire digital signature. They start in February. What some clients have done, and those of you who live in our our beach side on provinces that are outside of the capital, I've heard it's easier to get your appointment. But in San Jose, most banks are full. So the process you can follow, and you can ask your bank. But this is just what our clients have told us, because everyone left it to the last minute, including those who knew they had to do this and those who didn't, which, I mean, this didn't get as much publicity as it should have. You ask your bank for an appointment, and each bank has a different cost. So it goes, I've heard from $30 to $90. The digital signature device is something you have to sort of update. I think it's every 2 years, but this changes from bank to bank. And the what makes it difficult is that you can't just go to your bank and get the device, but you have to ask for an appointment. So that's why the appointments are full. So, I mean, I've had clients who requested it July, August, and they're getting their appointment now in November, December. So if you are a resident and this is something you can do, you can start. It doesn't have to be your own bank. You can ask around and call different banks and see if they have appointments and where in the country they have appointments. but yeah, it's very full. Okay, what is the typical cost? What is the typical cost for Sfera to handle the process for a three-owner property? Okay, no, we actually haven't talked about costs. This is very hard to say generally how much the cost would be, because it depends on a lot of matters. So, a lot of different points. So for example, the typical cost, and this is very generalized, is if we do it via proxy, it's $500. If we do it before a public notary, it's 400. But then a lot of things come into effect. If you have more than 2 3 corporations, we usually make a discount. If it's very simple, straightforward structures, um, if it's actually just one corporation but the corporate structure going up is very complicated, it's going to be a little more expensive because of the time it takes to file. um, and then when you say a three-owner property, I am guessing you mean it's a property that's owned through a corporation and 3 people are the owners. Um, it will depend on the process we follow, but those are the general costs for the filing. We also have the option that for those people who have a digital signature device and want us to file on your behalf, we can also do that, and that will depend on the amount of corporations you have. But that is also a service we're offering, because to be completely honest, it's not a very user-friendly platform, and we have had the situation with various clients who want to do it themselves, and then can't. Um, we also have the option. We've done this with, especially with Costa Ricans who have many corporations. Is you can come into the office, and how depending on the time it takes for us to explain how to file one of your corporations, and we do it with you, and then you learn. We do it by professional hour. So the cost will be how much, whatever time we invest in doing it, and if questions come up, we charge according to how much it takes to answer those questions. That's another option. We can do whatever is best for the client. Time wise, cost wise. That's it's very personalized according to your needs. We have another question. What if you have no revenue but you have expenses? This is more of a tax question of how you handle your corporation. In general terms, if you have a lot of revenue and you don't have expenses, in theory you're paying a lot of taxes, as a general precept. But if you mean in regards to the final beneficiary registry, there's really no immediate connection. Our general advice is always, things have gotten slightly more complicated on the tax end, and it's important to have an accountant, or at least have an advisor who tells you how to handle it, and then you handle it on your own. It doesn't mean you have to hire an accountant if your accounting is super simple. And then if you do have businesses that are operating and more than one corporation, and you have bank accounts, then we have our tax director is really good, and he helps most of our clients with those types of questions. So I believe that was our last question. If anyone wants any more information, even if we're already filing. Okay, we have another one. What if your revenue is received in the US but your expenses are in Costa Rica? That is more directed to your US tax accountant, or whoever handles your finance in the US, because it depends how you're managing your tax status in the US. So for example, a Costa Rican SRL, an LLC, is what in the US you call a check the box sort of corporation. And that's the reason why most US citizens have SRLs in Costa Rica, is because depending on how you file in the States, you can use, it's tax deductible, whatever you do here. But in general terms, every time we set up a corporate structure or we help our clients, we do it hand in hand with either your tax lawyer or your accountant in the US, because it has a lot of variables and it's not as straightforward to answer. So if anyone has any questions, I see a lot of names of people I know were helping to file. So if there's any questions you eventually have on the process we're doing on your behalf, or if you haven't contacted us to help you, my email is displayed on the screen, and you can contact me with any information you might have on this matter. And I hope the webinar was helpful, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.